This is John Einreinhofer with the West Virginia University Mountaineers NCAA Preview Podcast for thegruelingtruth.net. This podcast is sponsored by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer in Charleston, West Virginia, also practicing in New Jersey and Ohio as well as West Virginia, focusing on personal injury, employment law, and insurance law. You can find my law offices at johne law.com and also on Facebook as the law offices of John Einreinhofer. Sunday night, the brackets were revealed, and it was determined that the Mountaineers would be playing in Buffalo in the West region, even though it starts out in Buffalo, and they got a number 4 seed. That's pretty much what was expected when we went into the Big 12 tournament. Of course, the Mountaineers made the final where they fell to Iowa State, but no changes in the expected seeding. They get a 4 seed, and they'll be playing Bucknell in the first round. Bucknell is a number 13 seed. The game's going to be televised on CBS at 2:45 on Thursday afternoon. And one other TV scheduling point worthy of note is that also in West Virginia's bracket, Notre Dame and Princeton will play the game before West Virginia takes on Bucknell. West Virginia, if they get by, Bucknell will take on the winner of Notre Dame and Princeton. That's Notre Dame with a number 5 seed and Princeton with a number 12 seed. They'll play at 12:15 on Thursday afternoon. The Mountaineers finished with a record of 26-8. Ironically, Bucknell also comes in with a record of 26-8, of course, against much different competition than West Virginia faces in the Big 12 Power Conference. Bucknell is the Bison. They won their regular season and tournament championships in the Patriot League, which is, of course, an impressive feat no matter what league you're in when you think how you can stumble during these conference tournaments, especially with teams that have won the regular season. But again, in a mid-major type conference like the Patriot, you know if you don't win your tournament, you're not getting in. So certainly teams like Bucknell have to be very focused going into their tournament. And what's worthy to note about Bucknell's focus is they've won 12 out of 14 games coming into the NCAA tournament. Also worthy of note is Bucknell had the Patriot League's Player of the Year in junior center Nana Fuland. He averages 14.8 points a game and 7.9 rebounds a game. So the Mountaineers' bigger guys of Elijah Macon, Brandon Watkins, Sags Kanate, they'll have to do their job, of course, defensively in this one. One also trivia fact that is worthy of note for the Mountaineers matchup with Bucknell is that they last played in 1977, 40 years ago, where the Mountaineers won 112-71, and a player named Bob Huggins scored in double digits. He had 12 for the Mountaineers in that win. Bucknell also had the Patriot League's Coach of the Year in Nathan Davis. Looking at the feelings of Coach Bob Huggins going into the tournament, Coach Huggins, from a superstitious perspective, likes the fact that this first round for the Mountaineers will be in Buffalo. The Mountaineers started their path to the Final Four in Buffalo in 2010 with 2 wins. Coach Huggins has also stated to ESPN, and he stated on other occasions, that he feels like some of his players are trying to do things that they're not that good at doing. In other words, somebody who's not a shooter taking too many shots, somebody who's not a dribbler doing a little too much dribbling. I think some other interesting quotes from Coach Huggins yesterday after their selection as a number 4 seed, though, was that he indicated that Nathan Adrian, who he has said repeatedly this year is one of the Mountaineers' best players, along with Javon Carter, is not fully healthy. He also said that other, in fact, co-best player on the team, Javon Carter, is also not healthy, and he said Tavon Myers also has a sprained ankle, and that he needs to get the team healthy. Of course, everybody who's not playing in the first four will get a chance to rest up after their conference tournament going into the first round of NCAA play. But if what Bob Huggins is saying about the Mountaineers is accurate, we don't have any reason to believe it's not, then possibly that'll help the offense get going a little more as we enter the NCAA tournament. The Mountaineers finished their Big 12 season in the Big 12 tournament final, where they lost to Iowa State. They had beaten Iowa State 2 previous times this season. This time, Iowa State seemed to be playing a little bit better of defense. Iowa State already has a tremendous offense. We knew that going in, and that offense was still on full display Saturday night in that Big 12 final. But there's no dispute that the Mountaineers' offense on the whole in the Big 12 tournament did not play well, including an abysmal performance against Kansas State in the semifinal, which they were lucky to escape. The Mountaineers only shot 27% in that game. I think one thing worthy of note, though, is Kansas State does have one of the better defensive teams in the country. I think that was trouble for the Mountaineers, obviously. I've said on a few occasions, and I still believe it, despite some of the struggles in the Big 12 tournament, I think this is the best offense Bob Huggins has had at West Virginia since his Final Four team in 2010. However, the offense did stall out in the Big 12 tournament. There's no disputing that. Despite the fact, though, that it was a home game, I thought that the offense looked very good against Iowa State up in Morgantown in the regular season finale. I think that offense is still capable of showing itself in this tournament. And I am not ready to give up on this team, certainly. I think that the offense will get itself back together in this tournament, starting with the game against Bucknell. And I think that the Mountaineers are capable of making a run here with that offense that has been improved on the season, except for the last few games, being the difference from some of the past years. There's a lot of discussion about how difficult West Virginia's press will be on other teams. Of course, the Mountaineers have been on a mission all season, and I know their fan base has been on a mission for the Mountaineers all season to avenge last year's somewhat embarrassing first-round exit against Stephen F. Austin in the first round of the NCAA tournament, where the Mountaineers suffered a double-digit defeat. Of course, the thinking being, well, Stephen F. Austin didn't see the Mountaineers press, and they didn't have any problem with it. Of course, the first game of the tournament, there's a little more time to prepare. But I think this year in Big 12 play, more than last year, that the Big 12 has been seeing the Press Virginia defensive attack this is the third season now. And I saw a lot of evidence that the Big 12, just from that familiarity now, the third year of it, was starting to catch up to it as the season went along. I think Bob Huggins saw the same thing as he started to employ much more 1-3-1 defense as the season went on. And in fact, the zone that he went into at the end of the Kansas State semifinal in the Big 12 tournament was actually the difference in getting that 1-point victory, as they got a huge stop against Kansas State using the zone. But I think that there is no other Big 12 team in WVU's bracket. They do not have to worry about seeing a team with that kind of familiarity with the Press Virginia. If they get by Bucknell and the seeds play out true to form, Notre Dame would be the Mountaineers' second round opponent in the round of 32. Notre Dame would only have one day to prepare for the Press Virginia defensive attack, and they're going to be a little bit more tired after having played in the tournament. Of course, the Mountaineers, it's not that they wouldn't be tired as well, but the idea of the way Bob Huggins has used his entire roster with the Press Virginia defensive attack is to stay fresher than the opponents and be able to employ that press whenever they need to throughout the game. One thing that will also help the Mountaineers, speaking of health, Bob Huggins did not mention him specifically this time around, although he has been talking about it a lot. Issa Ahmad has not looked the same since he missed the 3 games with the back spasms. He's getting back to his regular minutes, but he is an offensive player that can really make a difference. He made huge strides offensively this year compared to his freshman year last year. Nathan Adrian, of course, also made huge strides offensively from the previous time in his career in Morgantown. If these guys can get back to the kind of offense that they've been playing through much of the year, and as Coach Huggins said about the health, if everybody's back to full health, we know what Javon Carter can do. Mountaineers have a lot of other players capable of contributing on any given night. Daxter Miles, Tariq Phillip, Elijah Macon had a very strong second half of the year. Lamont West has gone cold lately with his shooting, but he's shown during the year what he can do from the three-point line. All he's got to do is get hot again. I still think this is a deeper offensive Mountaineer team than they've had at any time since 2010, and I think that's going to enable them to move forward. I think that they'll get by Bucknell in this first round. One thing that's interesting is that, again, if the seeds play out true to form, they would play Notre Dame, who would have to beat Princeton in the first round. I don't completely underestimate Princeton. They won the first ever Ivy League tournament. They've had a tremendous season. They've always been a team, at least historically, you don't know how much that means with different casts of characters as years go on, different coaching staffs. But, of course, Princeton's got a history of being a difficult opponent during the tournament. But again, if the seeds play true to form, the Mountaineers would be playing Notre Dame in round 2. Of course, the Mountaineers have a long history with playing Mike Bray and Notre Dame. They last played in 2012 when both teams were still in the Big East, final season in the Big East for the Mountaineers. And I think even though we're dealing with different players, and you have to look at that first, they still do have Mike Bray, who's an excellent coach. Bob Huggins, of course, still coaching the Mountaineers, also a coach with a tremendous record. But maybe that makes those past matchups worth a little more. And the Mountaineers always had a lot of trouble with Notre Dame when they were in the Big East. So if you're a Mountaineer fan, that matchup is certainly a concern. Notre Dame made the finals of the ACC tournament, where they fell to a Duke team that got hot and started living up to its preseason expectations. Notre Dame also finished the regular season ranked 22nd in the country. Of course, the Mountaineers were at 11 in the polls, so they were actually ranked higher. But a lot of people think that with Notre Dame's run to the ACC tournament final, that they were actually seated too low at a 5. You remember last year, it was said even before the game, there was a lot of feeling that Stephen F. Austin team was a lot better than its seed, and then the Mountaineers had to take them on in the first round. You're not making excuses, but when there's a little bit off with the seeding, everybody feels that the tournament committee pretty much got things right this year. I do as well. There's just a little bit of griping with some of these seeds, Wichita State being the one that stood out the most, being a top 25 team that got a 10 seed. Notre Dame may have been seeded a little bit low, and why that matters is because then when you're the higher seed, when the Mountaineers a 4, but still you run into that team before you'd like to if they've been seeded lower than they should be. One thing about the Mountaineers offense, and Coach Huggins has talked about it, the players have talked about it, this I do agree with, the Mountaineers ball movement has been much, much better on offense than it was in past years. This team really plays like a team. It's one of the things you have to like about this team. Of course, team known for its toughness with the Press Virginia, but a lot of people get to play, so you can't have selfishness when you use as many players as West Virginia does. And their offense has also improved because, again, more ball movement this year than they've had in the past. In fact, in terms of pure scoring, the Mountaineers were one of the higher scoring teams in the country throughout the years. Now they get a lot of their points off of turnovers, and that adds to it, but you could just see a better offense this season, despite some of the stumbles at the end in the Big 12 tournament. As I was alluding to, a potential second-round game against Notre Dame really does worry me. I don't put that much stock into it, but the Mountaineers' history against Notre Dame does worry me a bit in that round 2 game. And, of course, the ACC is a tough conference. The Mountaineers, of course, in the Big 12, also a tough conference. A real early power-type matchup, a matchup of teams that were ranked in the top 25 in the regular season. Of Of course, WVU spent a lot of the season inside the top 10. Notre Dame did not fly as high in the rankings as the Mountaineers did all season. And I think that's something to also look at when you look at the relative strengths of the teams, at least the way people were looking at it as the regular season closed. I think the conference tournaments don't mean as much as they used to. Of course, for the mid-majors, they do when they've got to win to get that automatic bid because they're in one-bid leagues. But for leagues like the ACC and the Big 12, you want to win it out of pride for your program and recognition. But teams like Notre Dame and West Virginia know they're going to the NCAAs at that point in the year under the current system. So you don't want to put too much stock in them. And I am, frankly, not going to overrate it at this point. I think the Mountaineers can get by the Fighting Irish in the second round if they play. I think they can get by Princeton. So I think the Mountaineers will make it into the Sweet 16. If the seeding plays to form, that's ultimately going to run them into Gonzaga. Team, of course, with a 32-1 record. And an unfortunate history for the Mountaineers there is the last time that they did play them in the NCAA tournament, the Mountaineers were obliterated by Gonzaga. However, with that said, I think that Gonzaga is the weakest of the 4 number 1 seeds, as the tournament committee did rank it. I also think that when you look in West Virginia's region, the West, frankly, out of the 4 regions, in my opinion, I think the West is the weakest. I know people are talking about Florida State being in there, but I think that Florida Gulf Coast team could give Florida State some problems as one of the live underdogs you might have to watch out for in that first round. But can the Mountaineers beat the number 1 seed Gonzaga? I think they can. I think this is the weakest of the number 1 seeds. I think the Mountaineers can do that and reach the Elite 8. I've felt as this season went on, the Mountaineers are an Elite 8 team. I said it before, and I think being in this West region, I think that they have a very good shot at making the Elite 8. Of course, any team in the NCAA tournament can have stumbles. It's never easy when you're talking about making the Elite 8. I think the Mountaineers still can do it, and being in this region the way it stacks up, I think that it's within their capabilities. I think the Notre Dame matchup is a very tough one for them, but I think they get by it. And if it plays that true to form, I think Gonzaga will get that far, but I think that the Mountaineers can beat them in the Sweet 16, taking them to the Elite 8. I think the Mountaineers, though, will ultimately run into the number 2 seeded Pac-10 champion Arizona Wildcats, who possess a 30-4 record, coached by Sean Miller, formerly of Pitt, so Mountaineer fans should be familiar with him. He was also a player for Pitt. I do not think the Mountaineers can get by this Arizona team. Arizona is one of my Final Four picks, and as somebody who follows and obviously roots for the Mountaineers, like to hope for the best, but I think this run can go to the Elite 8 for the Mountaineers this year, but I do not think it will go past Arizona, who I think will end up being the team that comes out of the West region. Looking at the tournament overall as a whole, which, of course, the idea for everybody, the dream is to try to win the tournament. You're trying to get as far as you can. I think you want to look at the big picture. I never dispute in terms of ignore what Las Vegas says, because even though the ideas of odds is to get money bet on both teams, that's the way they set odds. But with that understood, the odds makers have to know more than you do. If you knew more than them, you could go to Las Vegas in theory as a professional gambler and be making so much money you would retire. There's very, 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 very few people that can do that, which means I always go back to the odds makers know more than you do, even though it doesn't mean they're never wrong. And then people will point out an instance when the odds makers are wrong and say, hey, look, the odds makers, ha. The fact is, if you have to go up against them every time, the people setting those odds in Las Vegas, they're gonna beat you much more than you beat them. So you always want to take a look at that. And looking at it, Duke at 5-1 is actually the favorite right now to win the NCAA tournament. So people in the know feel that they got hot at the right time. Second, North Carolina, not real surprising there. Blue Bloods of college basketball. Third, Kansas. So if you're a Big 12 fan, you like that Kansas is getting that respect from the odds makers to at least be the third most likely team to win the NCAA tournament. Fourth is Kentucky. Fifth is Villanova. Villanova is my pick to win the whole thing. The odds makers think they're the fifth most likely to win it. And sixth is Gonzaga, who I mentioned. I think the Mountaineers can get by, but they are, according to the odds makers, the sixth most likely team to win it all. Looking at my Final Four picks, I like Villanova, Louisville, North Carolina, and Arizona to make it to the Final Four. I'm looking at a Villanova North Carolina rematch in the title game. And I like Villanova to repeat. They've just had a tremendous regular season at 30-3. They do have the 2 losses to Butler in the Big East, but the Big East got a lot of respect from the committee. And as most Mountaineers fans fondly remember, I think West Virginia's time in the Big East, it worked out the way it had to with concerns about football and conference realignment, but I love the Mountaineers being in the Big East, and I've been impressed how these basketball schools have been able to regroup, add teams like Creighton, Butler, Xavier. They've got a TV contract on FS1 during the regular season where those games are on regularly, and Villanova won the national title last year. They've got a lot of bids. They got more bids than the Big 12 did in the NCAA tournament this year, which is hard to believe, even though the Big 12 only has 10 teams. It's really impressive to see how the reconstitution of the Big East Basketball League has been so successful in such a short time. But again, if seeds play out to form, West Virginia will run into Gonzaga in this tournament. I think they can get by them. If you're a true fan, especially with all these battles of conference realignment and schools moving conferences that you've had in the recent decades, I think even though you may be in a conference like West Virginia Big 12 that you don't have a long history with, arguably the success of your conference is more important than ever, literally to keep your conference alive. So I always like to take a look at how your team's conference is doing and how it looks. For Big 12 fans, Kansas State's going to play Tuesday night in the first 4, and they're going to play an ACC team in Wake Forest. So those are teams you're competing with at the top. Of course, you can argue and say, well, is a Kansas State Wake Forest game in the first 4 going to make that much of a difference in the power alignments of the conferences? No, not that game alone, but it's one piece of the puzzle, and it starts out tomorrow night. If you want a little incentive to tune in on the first 4, that is, for me, as somebody that follows the Big 12 regularly, you want Kansas State to get that win right off the bat against an ACC team. Kansas State's got a good defensive team. I think they can get by Wake Forest. I see most people picking Wake Forest in that game, but you want the Big 12 to get off to a good start, even if it's in the first 4, and have Kansas State pick up a win. Also looking at the conference, Kansas, despite Bill Self, all his success, all the talk about all the regular season success at Kansas, and I'm not saying that should be appreciated, the NCAA tournament trips, the Final Four, getting to the Final Four record as opposed to NCAA tournament trips isn't real good. And obviously Kansas is the flag bearer for the Big 12 with their basketball tradition, the kind of recruits they get, the success. If you're a fan of the Big 12, and WVU does not have any other Big 12 teams in their region, so feel free to root away for those other Big 12 teams to make it to the Final Four, and one of those would be Kansas. So I'm saying if you're a Mountaineer fan, but you're a Big 12 fan, or even you're a Mountaineer fan, you want these Big 12 teams to do well to help the Mountaineers in the long run, you need Kansas to show something this year. I mean, 28-4 regular season record, but it's just time for them to make a deep tournament run. The standards at the program are so high, it's really time for them to make a Final Four run. Other Big 12 teams, I like the way Iowa State had played very well. They had won 6 straight before the Mountaineers beat them in the season finale in Morgantown, and then Iowa State went right ahead and picked up 3 wins in the Big 12 tournament to win the Big 12 tournament for the 3rd time. That team has tremendous offense. the preseason player of the year in Monte Morris. He looks fantastic. They've got a lot of guys that can score the basketball. I think that Iowa State team has a chance to make a run. Now, they're in the same region as Kansas. They'll run into Kansas along the way. They did beat Kansas at Kansas last year. I think that they could beat Kansas again in the tournament. One thing they've got to watch, they've got a sleeper in a 5-12 matchup. They're a 5. They're playing Nevada in the first round. Nevada is 28-6, won the Mountain West. That's a tough basketball team to only be seeded 12. Iowa State's got to watch that first round matchup. If they get by, I think they'll be okay. They run into Kansas somehow along the way if Kansas doesn't get knocked off. Kansas will probably have a difficult second round matchup. They've got what we call the virtual bye in the first round. They're playing a 16 seed, and it's a 16 seed coming off a play-in game. So if history is any indication there, Kansas is basically got a bye in the first round. But in the second round, they got to play the winner of Miami and Michigan State. Michigan State has 14 losses, but with Tom Izzo's history of success, you still always worry about them. And Miami, the ACC, obviously is a tough basketball conference. You just can't ignore that fact, and that could be tough for Kansas there in the second round. Oklahoma State also in the tournament from the Big 12. They've also got an excellent point guard. You would hope that these top point guards in the Big 12 help the teams make deep runs into the tournament. Oklahoma State's a 10 seed, and they're taking on old friend for Mountaineer fans, John Beilein, and the red-hot Michigan team in the first round. And all Mountaineer fans know how well John Beilein can coach, and it's not looking good for Oklahoma State in the Big 12 in the first round against Michigan. I don't see them beating John Beilein and Michigan in that first round 7 seed versus a 10 seed matchup. One other thing I think that helps the Mountaineers in their bracket if things don't play true to form and the Mountaineers win, you've got Vanderbilt's in the Mountaineers bracket. They've got 15 losses, and they're in the tournament. The SEC is not the conference it used to be, despite Kentucky being in there. Xavier from the Big East has got 13 losses. They're in there. Now, Florida State's in there. A lot of people like Florida State. They're a 3 seed. They're seeded higher than the Mountaineers. Just for myself, Florida State, despite where they've been ranked all year, not one of the teams that I'm that high on. But again, the general thought this year with the tournament, with the brackets, is that on the whole, the committee got it right. Not a lot of controversy about who got left out. Syracuse was left out, but despite the fact that they're in the ACC, 10-8 in the conference, yeah, tough conference, but just 2 games over 500, 14 losses, a weak non-conference schedule, and 2-11 on the road. I think the committee did the right thing leaving Syracuse out. Monmouth had 27 wins. They were the regular season champs of the MAAC. Had a top 50 RPI. Mountaineer fans may be familiar with them as they had come into Morgantown in recent years, not this year. They lost the game at the buzzer to South Carolina in their non-conference, and they did beat Princeton, who's in the tournament, won the Ivy League tournament. But they were blown out by Syracuse and North Carolina, and they didn't make it despite the fact they had 27 wins. Also, outside of the automatic bids for the mid-major teams that were one-bid leagues, the committee didn't really put a lot of emphasis on the conference tournaments this year. I'm somebody who is more of a purist where I like to see the regular season mean more, so that does not particularly bother me much. So again, for the Mountaineers, they take on Patriot League champion Bucknell in the first round. I think they'll get by that. Very tough matchup anticipated with Notre Dame in the second round if they get by Princeton. I think the Mountaineers can get by that. I think the Mountaineers can pull the big upset of Gonzaga, but I don't think that they can get by Arizona. Arizona is who I have winning that bracket in the West. But first things first, Thursday afternoon, the Mountaineers, 2:45, play Bucknell with the objective of erasing the bad taste that was left in the the Mountaineers' mouths and the mouths of every Mountaineer fan, frankly, after last year's first round embarrassing loss to Stephen F. Austin. Been waiting a year to erase that. Thursday is hopefully going to be that day and move on from there. And speaking of Thursday, that is when my next podcast is going to be up on the WVU Mountaineers and their progress in the NCAA. We're going to have a fun show here for you on the gruelingtruth.net. It should be posted in the very early evening, Thursday about 6 o'clock-ish Eastern Time, right after the Mountaineers finish up with Bucknell. And we're going to have an especially fun podcast sponsored by my law offices, the law offices of John Einreinhofer, and co-sponsored by the offices of Manny, Ellis, and Lane. Manny, Ellis, and Lane are attorneys in Charleston, some good friends of mine. They're having their 10th anniversary March Madness party. They always coordinate it with the West Virginia Mountaineers game when they're in the tournament. It's held in West Virginia's capital city, Charleston, West Virginia. All the hardcore fans and boosters who can't see the Mountaineers in person in Buffalo because of work concerns or other reasons, they'll all be attending the party. There's a DJ, there's all kinds of fun, and I'm going to give you a little preview of the game as we start that podcast. Then we're going to go to the podcast from the 10th annual March Madness party at Manny, Ellis, and Lane. We're going to be bringing you all the Mountaineer fan festivities during that party as the Mountaineers take on Bucknell, and then we're going to have a postscript after that, talk about the result of the Mountaineers' first round game against Bucknell, where things go from there, and we'll take things from there, and hopefully the Mountaineers will be on their way to the second round against the Notre Dame Princeton winner. We'll also know who's won that game when I come to you on the podcast on Thursday. So thanks for joining me again, John Einreinhofer, here on the gruelingtruth.net. I want you to join me again starting Thursday evening, just after 6 o'clock Eastern, when we're going to have our Mountaineer podcast that's co-sponsored by the law offices of John Einreinhofer and Manny, Ellis, and Lane, and their 10th anniversary March Madness party from Charleston, West Virginia. So I hope to have you all join me again on Thursday, and thanks for listening to me here on the gruelingtruth.net for the West Virginia Mountaineers NCAA Preview Podcast.